Currently, many consider Chile to be one of the most advanced countries in the region. And as I always say, to understand everything that happens in the present, it is important to go back to the past and know the facts that forge the current nations. Fortunately, Chilean historians have divided the history of the southern country into certain periods. Do you want to know what they are? Let's go! So, let's stay until the end of the video to review these periods. Let's start with the Pre-Hispanic Period, where the first cultures that would inhabit the territory of modern Chile appeared. It is said that in ancient times the Chinchorro culture would stand out, which would have inhabited the current Antofagasta, and are notable for having left the oldest mummies in the world. Subsequently, new towns would appear throughout the country. Among the main ones we can observe on this map, Aymaras, Atacameños, Chango, Mapuches, Polas, Cuncos, Chernam, among others. One of the most notable cultures were the Aymaras, who inhabited the north of Chile and would be associated with the Tiahuanaco culture, which occupied a large part of present-day Bolivia, southern Peru, and northern Chile and Argentina. Unfortunately, the reasons for the decline of this culture are not known for certain, but by the 1100 AD, it is known that their influence in northern Chile would have ended. However, the most influential pre-Hispanic culture, and one that continues to be an important part of the national identity, are the Mapuches, who would have occupied a large part of the southern territories between Chile and Argentina from approximately the 5th century AD. I'll give you a spoiler. It's the only culture we'll see later on. Part of present-day Chile would be conquered by the Inca Tupac Yupanqui as part of the expansion of the Inca Empire. The Aymaras would be subjugated, and their territories would be annexed to the Collasuyo, the southern region of the Tahuantinsuyo, or Inca Empire. All this towards the 1480 Around 1520, the discovery phase would begin, when Ferdinand Magellan became the first European to reach present-day Chile, when he traveled the strait that bears his name today. A few years later, the Inca Empire would fall after the capture and execution of Inca Atahualpa, so the Spaniards would gain control of much of South America. From here, expeditions to the south would begin. The first, led by Diego de Almagro, ended in a failure that made him return to Cusco, sparking the civil war among the conquerors. The next expedition would be led by Pedro de Valdivia, a military man from Extremadura, who had the idea of establishing a new trade route between America and Europe. So he sought expansion to the south. Valdivia would found the capital, Santiago, in 1541, which would be the main fort and the capital of the Captaincy General of Chile, also called New Extremadura or Kingdom of Chile, and which would be part of the Viceroyalty of Peru, and of which the founder, Valdivia, would be the first governor. During the following years, Valdivia would found La Serena in 1544, Concepcion in 1550, Valdivia and Villarica in 1552, in addition to promoting the immigration of Spaniards both from the peninsula and settled in the Viceroyalty. However, the expansion would be resisted by the Mapuches. One of the first leaders of the resistance would be Lautaro, a former page of Valdivia, who would meet his lord again at the Battle of Tucapel, where after a victory, Governor Valdivia would be killed. The Arauco War between the Mapuches and Spanish conquerors had begun. The Mapuches would suffer a setback at the Battle of Mataquito, where Lautaro is killed. In general, this war is based on back and forth. The Mapuches would come in, loot the Spanish cities, who would then retaliate. Although it is worth highlighting the Mapuche resistance, who would be one of the few indigenous peoples of America who would resist so strongly against the European advance. The Conquest period would end with the death of Governor Martín García Oñez de Loyola in the Battle of Curalaba, where after a decisive Mapuche victory, the Spaniards switched to a defensive war, maintaining their borders to the north of the Biobío River, and seeking other alternatives to combat, such as the Christianization of the Mapuches by the Jesuits. The colonial period had begun. During this period, the Parliament of Quilín stands out, which would be the first peace agreements with the Mapuches, where the Biobío River would officially be established as the border. With this, Chile would progressively consolidate after having lost a large part of its population in the wars. However, the war would not yet be considered over. During this period, Chilean society would not be the exception to the Spanish domains. The social structure placed the Spaniards at the top of the social pyramid, followed by the Creoles, children of Spaniards born in the colony. The mestizos, descendants of both Spanish and indigenous people, occupied the third step, followed by the indigenous people of the north, who over time mixed until significantly reducing the population. At the bottom of the scale were the black slaves, who had a very small presence compared to the rest of the colonies. If you're enjoying this video, don't forget to subscribe to my channel to stay updated with more content. Around 1700, the Spanish crown would push for the Bourbon reforms in an attempt to enhance the power of the Spanish crown and removing certain autonomy privileges from all the colonies in America. Chile was no exception, which hindered free trade, resulting in an increase in smuggling markets. For obvious reasons, general discontent with the crown became apparent both in Chile and in the rest of the dependencies. The Arauco War would extend until 1772, the year in which peace with the Mapuches was defined through the Peace of Negrete, initiated by Governor Francisco Javier de Morales, although tensions would not completely disappear. Shortly after, with the creation of the Regnado del Rio de la Plata in 1776, the jurisdiction of the territory east of the Andes would come under Rio Platense sovereignty, which in the future would be part of Argentine territory. Two international foundations would serve as influence to start the spirits of independence. One, the independence of the United States, which would also suffer the injustices of British colonial intervention. Two, the French Revolution and the subsequent Napoleonic Wars, where Spain is invaded by Napoleon's France, turning it into a puppet government. This would be the perfect opportunity to achieve independence, and so it was, on September 18, 1810. The first government junta of Chile would be formed, thus overthrowing the last governor Francisco Garcia Carrasco and initiating the period of Old Homeland with Mateo Toro Zambrano as the first president who, upon his death in 1811, would be succeeded by Juan Martínez de Rosa, who had been secretary to Garcia Carrasco. This period of Old Homeland would end in 1814, after the Battle of Rancagua, where the Royalists would regain control of Chile. This reconquest would last until 1817 after the Battle of Chacabuco, where the Chilean Patriot forces under the command of Bernardo O'Higgins, with the support of the provinces of the Rio de la Plata under the command of José de San Martín, managed to defeat the Spanish Royalist forces, initiating the period of New Homeland with General O'Higgins as Supreme Director. But wait a minute, Chile was free, yes, but not until ensuring to expel all the Royalists from the continent. So together with San Martín and with the support of the brain of Thomas Cochrane, the liberating expedition would be formed that would support to consolidate the independence of Peru in 1821, although the new homeland would last until the resignation of O'Higgins in 1823, thus ending the period of independence. The diversion from the Spanish yoke was concluded, and the Republic of Chile was born. During the following period, the organization of the Republic achieves the conquest of the Chiloé archipelago. In addition, the Constitution and laws are taking shape. The period would end with a civil war in 1829 between the Popolo faction, liberals, and the Pelicones, conservatives, which ends with a victory for the latter faction, thus initiating the Conservative Republic. During this period, the Constitution of 1833 would be established, which would last almost a century. In addition, Chile would face its first international conflict as a republic during the war against the Peruvian-Bolivian Confederation, where it sends support to the Peruvian restorers, thus ending the union of both countries. As for the expansion of the territory, Chile consolidated the colonization of Yanquihue, managing to obtain sovereignty over the regions of the rivers and lakes, in addition to gaining control of the Strait of Magellan in 1843 during the decade of Manuel Bulnes. This period would end with a new civil war in 1859. Despite quelling the rebellion, the government of Manuel Montt would lose stability and would be the last conservative government, thus giving rise to the Liberal Republic. This would be the final period of Chilean expansion. First, the last Spanish attempts to regain control are expelled, fighting alongside Peru and Bolivia during the Hispano-South American War, although in the few years it would face both nations during the Pacific War, where due to disagreements with Bolivia during the exploitation of guano and saltpeter, Chile would enter into conflict with the highland country, which had a secret alliance with Peru. As a result, Chile achieved victory after quickly gaining control over the sea, which led to the annexation of Antofagasta from Bolivia, leaving it landlocked, and Arica and Tacna from Peru. However, as a cost of this, Chile would renounce sovereignty over a large part of eastern Patagonia to prevent Argentina from joining the enemy alliance. The Chilean annexations would continue after the occupation of Araucanía, after which Chile would manage to extend southward at the cost of defeating the Mapuche resistance and then establishing the Mapuche reductions. Finally, Chile would annex Easter Island or Rapa Nui, following the Treaty of 1888, where the Rapa Nui would cede sovereignty of the islands to the Chilean government. The Liberal Republic would conclude with the Chilean Civil War of 1891, after which President Balmaceda would face the Republic's Congress, who had the support of part of the armed forces. The result was a victory for Congress with the suicide of Balmaceda, after handing over power to Jorge Montt in the establishment of the parliamentary regime. This period was characterized by Congress dominating national politics with the president limited to the decision of the parliamentary majority. It also meant economic growth thanks to mining and sediment exploitation, although on the other hand, inequality was growing, given that by 1910 illiteracy exceeded 60% of the population. Due to the deplorable working conditions of the workers, protests would arise that culminated in dark episodes such as the Santa Maria de Quique massacre. This period would end with a new coup d'etat in 1924, which would lead to the Constitution of 1925 and the period of the Presidential Republic. As its name suggests, this period was characterized by the restoration of the president's power. Chile would be affected by the economic crisis of '29, which led to economic and political instabilities that were reflected in episodes such as the undervaluation of the Chilean squadron, where the Navy would capitulate within a few days. At the end of the 1930s, a series of radical governments would begin seeking the egalitarian principles of the French Revolution. The middle class was emerging. Another important event was when Chile asserted its sovereignty over the Antarctic territory, after some agreements in the 1947 gas. Chile had become a tricontinental country. However, Chile would fall back into a severe economic crisis in 1933, during the government of the socialist Salvador Allende. A crisis that is a subject of debate and would be the prelude to the coup d'etat, led by General Augusto Pinochet in September of the same year, where the president allegedly committed suicide. Some versions claim that this would not be the case. What do you think? Anyway, the point is that this would mark the beginning of the military dictatorship period, where Pinochet would rule until 1990. This period was characterized by being an extreme right-wing dictatorship that would dissolve the Congress. Its main features: anti-communism, prohibition of political parties, limitation of freedom of expression, lack of democracy, and finally, constant human rights violations. The estimates of the death toll during this regime is a subject of debate. The figures range between 10,000 and 30,000 people. In terms of foreign policy, the dictatorship would start to be viewed negatively after the assassination of the opposition figure Orlando Letelier. On the other hand, the conflict of Biel with Argentina almost led to a military confrontation that fortunately did not break out. In 1980, the political constitution would be enacted that would remain in force until our days. Eventually, the dictatorship would lose influence, so the opposition manages to consolidate the 1988 referendum, where the Chilean people would decide no to the continuation of Pinochet's government. With this, the tradition of democracy would begin. As its name suggests, during this period, democracy would be resumed and it would extend to the present day, where contemporary presidents would govern. The socio-economic takeoff of Chile had begun, which positions it today as one of the most prosperous economies in the region and as the country with the highest human development index in Latin America. If you liked this video, don't forget to support me with a like, leave a comment, and subscribe to my channel to stay updated with more content. See you next time.